future, an uncertain prognosis. And a wonderful Chabad rabbi came to my bed. And he came at just the right time, at just the right moment. And I remember his name was Rabbi Chaim Malevsky. And what the rabbi helped me to realize was something absolutely remarkable. For he helped me to realize two things. He helped me to realize that, number one, our life is defined by the experiences that make us who are chosen for us. See, I remember getting a call one morning from an Orthodox woman. And I remember she said something incredibly critical to me. She asked me a question. She said, "You know, Richard, I've been a loyal Jew my entire life. I follow the rules. I keep Sabbath. I'm kosher. I've done everything that's been expected of me." She wanted to know how it was that she could do everything right, that she could follow every rule, that she could be a pious, humble, and good person. And after following all the rules and doing everything that was expected of her, she wanted to know why it was that Hashem gave her a severely disabled child. She asked me, she said, "Richard, what kind of a life is my child going to have? Is he going to have any friends? Is he going to get an education? Will he ever live independently? Will my son ever take a wife, have a job, do the most rudimentary or basic things?" She asked me really the question that goes something like this. Was there anything about her child that was going to be remotely ordinary to that of other children? And I remember answering the question and telling her this. Often is the case that those people who have an easy life don't always have a good one. People that have everything they want whenever they want it tend to be the most unfulfilled people that you're going to meet, befriend, or come in contact with. See, I've really come to believe from my own life and from my own experiences that we're all searching to answer a basic question. We're all searching to understand why it is that Hashem allows for bad things to happen to otherwise good people. We're trying to understand why is it that there are some who walk among us who have a greater burden, who have a greater struggle, who know greater obstacles. We try to understand and we try to appreciate. Why does Hashem create certain people? Why does Hashem give certain people a greater, more challenging life that He ultimately gives to others? And I think the answer really goes down to something like this. If you choose to believe that you're part of something bigger, that you're part of something grander, and you're part of something noble, more noble than you can possibly imagine or possibly believe. But if you choose to believe that you're part of a plan that you can't understand, that you can't appreciate, that you can't even begin to recognize, you tend to have a better and more fulfilling life. I also believe that people like myself, who know struggle, who know hardship, who know adversity and who know difficulty come to have a better, more exciting, and more fulfilling life than those who don't have it, than those who don't have the struggle, than those who don't have the hardship, than those who don't have the adversity, than those who don't know the difficulty. I want you to imagine something. I've had the opportunity to complete 18 marathons. In addition to 18 marathons...
How do you run marathons?
I'm sorry?
How do you run them?
I'll get into that. In addition to doing 18 marathons, I also completed the Ironman competition.
Oh, wow.
For those of you who aren't familiar, the Ironman is a 2.4-mile swim, followed by a 112-mile run,
wow,
followed by a 26.2-mile,
bike ride.
112-mile bike, followed by a 26.2-mile run. I want you guys to think about something, if you could. I want you to imagine what it's like to dive into a frigid body of water. The water temperature of Lake Coeur d'Alene was 55 degrees. I want you to imagine what it's like to be swimming in a frigid body of water, having no idea where you are, having no idea where you're going, having no idea what's going on around you. I want you to imagine, if you would, what it's like to be doing this competition and getting kicked in the face the entire time.
Wow.
Being blind, you can't brace for the impact. I want you to imagine what it's like to try to surface and get oxygen, but being unable to do so because there's other swimmers immediately above you. I want you to imagine one last thing. I want you to imagine what it would be like as you're swimming to have other swimmers get entangled in the rope that connects you to your guide.
Oh, wow.
And have the rope take you below the surface. And have to feel that sense of drowning and not knowing what's going to happen next. After you finish that, you do a 112-mile bike and you do a 26.2-mile run. The one thing that I can share with each and every one of you from my own personal experience is that what you learn from that situation, what you learn from that circumstance, is that when it's scary, when it's painful, when the fear is the greatest, that's when you realize that Hashem will always give you what you need when you need it. No more, but certainly no less. I'm going to end with two last stories, and then we'll get into conversation, and we'll really kind of get to know each other as much as we can. One of the things that I wanted to do when I was younger was I wanted to be in the military. But unfortunately, because of my disability, I was told that I couldn't do it. So I joined and became very close with the IDF and worked with the Air Force to help integrate the military so that people with disabilities who want to serve can have a chance to do so. But in order to do this, you had to work with the individual base commanders. You couldn't just work with the top generals, you had to work with all the individual commanders of the various bases. And the question was, how do you make this work? How do you do this? We did it by traveling all across the country, by doing marathons and triathlons all throughout the state. It was the day just before the Jerusalem Marathon. We were doing a press conference with the IDF, and it was in the heart of the old city. And I always remember this because in the middle of my presentation, I could hear the sound of sirens as they were wailing through the city. I was able to hear announcements come over the loudspeaker. And I remember being apprised that Jerusalem had been subject to its most violent attack in over 15 years. A pregnant woman and her child were killed. 50 other people were critically injured. The IDF indicated that in that part of the world, one attack is usually a precursor to many. Their security zone had been violated. The marathon is 26.2 miles, and they said there's no way they could guarantee any form of security. The question was, what do we do? The IDF said, even with the risk, the marathon has to go forward. To not do it would show a tremendous level of weakness. I think we asked the question, why is it that bad things happen to good people? I think we asked the question, why is it do some people have a greater struggle or burden than others? It was a beautiful day in Central Park. I was walking in the pedestrian lane. As I walked at the bottom of the steepest hill within the park, a cyclist approached the top. The bicyclist was going at a speed of in excess of 35 miles per hour according to the NYPD. As he hit the hill, he lost control. And as he lost control, he veered into the pedestrian lane and struck me directly in the back. I think we ask ourselves the question, why would Hashem allow this to happen? As a person who's blind, I used athletics as a way to cope with my disability. I used athletics for identity. I used athletics to find a sense of self. But in the matter of an instant, that was over. I had to spend over 10 weeks at Mount Sinai Hospital. I couldn't do the most basic things like use the toilet, take a shower, put clothes on. I had to experience pain that was indescribable. It still exists today. Pain when you have a shattered hip and pelvis and femur never really ends. The question is why? Why would Hashem allow this to happen? Why would Hashem allow for such a thing to take place? A person who struggled his whole life, a person who kind of found his way through athletics, to now have that taken? This past November, I did my 18th New York City Marathon. The level of pain during that marathon on a shattered pelvis and hip was indescribable. The pain became so severe at certain points that literally you become nauseous and you have to struggle so that you don't pass out on the street. Because your body wants you to stop and it will do anything to get you to do so. It's at that moment, at that time, that we all have a fierce struggle within ourselves. The struggle becomes palpable. What I can tell you about my own personal experience is that right at that moment, when the pain becomes so severe, so intense, when the battle is raging at such a point that you simply don't know how you're going to continue, that's when you ultimately make your peace. You make your peace with yourself. You make your peace with your newfound life. You make your peace with your new body. You make your peace with your new circumstance. And you ultimately make your peace with Hashem. Why do some people have a greater burden? Why do some people know a greater hardship and difficulty than others? We go back in time to the Jerusalem Marathon. As we ran through the city of Jerusalem, the Israeli press reported that seeing a blind person the day after a major attack find his way, deal with his uncertainties and his fears, made it a little easier for a city. Made it a little easier for a city to move forward. for parents to send their kids to school, for people to go back to work and get back on buses. We ask, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do some have a greater burden? I believe the answer is this. We all reach a certain point in our lives where you simply have to make a choice. You simply have to decide that you can't keep spending your time and your energy and your effort trying to get over it. You got to simply focus on just getting on with it. I think ultimately everyone here will do what is hard and achieve what is great. Because we come from a lineage and a heritage of people that hungers for greatness. So that's kind of my formal story. And now what I want to do now is open it up to you and let you ask whatever questions you would like about Judaism, about what I do for a living, about athletics, about spirituality, about any of the things that you would be curious about asking. There's no question off limits. There's no question out of bounds. Any question is appropriate. And in fact, the more personal the question, the more I think we have a chance to learn from each other. So, who's got a question?
I heard you're a lawyer?
Yes, that's correct.
How do you study for the law?
The question is, how do you practice law when you're blind?
How do you study, Lord?
Sure. So we'll start with law school. Basically, the way that it works in school was that I don't read and write. So I'd have to memorize and internalize everything that the professor said. Braille is only used by 10% of the blind population. It was designed during times and days when expectations were different for the blind. So I would internalize and memorize everything that the professor would say. Now a law school fact pattern would go something like this. It'd be a 10 to 15 page fact pattern, and you have to identify all the issues within the fact pattern. The fact pattern could be 15 pages. I would have to have it read to me 20 to 30 times, and I have to memorize everything within the fact pattern. The bar exam was a little bit more difficult, because the bar exam, you'd have a full page fact pattern. You'd have statement 1, statement 2, statement 3, statement 4, statement 5. A would be statement 1, 2, and 3 applies. B would be statements 1, 2, and 4 apply. C would be statements 2 and 4 apply. D would be statements 2, 4, and 5 applies. You have to memorize the entire fact pattern, all the statements, and then all the selections that you could choose. So everything took me like 4 times longer than it did for other students. And it was a miracle that I was able to get through and survive law school. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes?
What's it like practicing practicing law when there's a jury around? Do you find that extremely challenging to actually convey your message to them?
It's a great question. The answer to the question is that ultimately, as a blind attorney, I think you have to work much harder than opposing counsel. See, we use the common law system in federal court, which is where I predominantly practice. And when I go to court, there's usually about 20 or 30 cases that I have to memorize that follow the common law system. So I have to memorize about 20, 30 cases on my side to be able to argue them. There's also about 20 or 30 cases on the other side that you have to know, so when the other side brings them up, you can argue those cases. So I think at the end of the day, it requires you to have to be immensely prepared and intensely focused. So I don't think that you get fazed too much by, who's around. It's the fact that the level of preparation is so intense that in order to practice, you have to work that much harder to do it. Other questions?
Were you born blind, or?
Yes. So I was born blind, and I've been blind my entire life. So I really have no idea what the world that you live in is even remotely like.
Can you see shadows or anything, or
No.
just completely?
So completely. And ultimately, it's interesting because I always like to use the example of Beethoven. Beethoven was a great composer, as you all know, but as you also know, Beethoven was deaf. But there's one critical thing about Beethoven is he could hear when he was a child. So if you've never been able to see before, there are certain concepts you'll never know. You know, how would you define what blue is? What red is? How can you define what the sky is, what the ocean is? If you've never seen the ocean or never seen the sky, those are simple things that, unless you have an understanding of what it is, you're not able to relate to it. Other questions?
Was there a certain point in your life where you decided that, that you were going to overcome and persevere no matter what the challenge was? Was there a time where you were down? When did you
That's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful question. Everyone gets down. It's just the way it is. Everyone. I mean, when I was at Mount Sinai, it was hard for me because I was always an independent person, and you had to be lifted and carried. You couldn't do the most rudimentary or even the most basic things for yourself. So you couldn't do anything on your own. I think what it really came down to was the fact that you just have to kind of, for me personally, you have to believe that, this is just me, you have to believe that you're part of something bigger. And that life is like a very fleeting thing, and that you're part of a grander or bigger mission or purpose that you might not know of or appreciate. But I think for me it was the idea that, okay, there was a reason or a purpose for this that I don't know or appreciate or understand. But once I recognized that I was part of that, it made it easier to kind of move forward and deal with what it is that you have to deal with to kind of keep going. But no one goes through their life always happy. Anyone who goes through their life, being happy and joyous and upbeat all the time isn't a real person. Everyone has to go through really difficult and challenging times. It's just the way life is. What I will say, though, is that the people that go through it tend to be the people who live more and do more. And I think the real question is, in terms of as you go through life, the people who survive are the people who adapt. It's all about adaptation. If you're able to adapt, you're able to survive. Other questions?
How do you imagine the world?
Good question.
Because you can't experience it.
Right. So you don't. You don't imagine it at all in a visual frame or a visual context. In the movies, they'll always have a blind person feeling someone's face. They'll always have someone like, oh, do you want to touch my face? And they have the person feel the person's face. But the thing is that if you've never seen a human face, even if you're touching a face, if you've never seen one before, you're not able to know what it could possibly look like. So what it really comes down to is that when we dream, we just don't dream visually. So we dream in sound, we dream in experiences, we dream in other things. But we don't use any kind of visual frame or reference for anything that we do because we're just not able to do it. Other questions?
Do you have a wish you could see?
Good question. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If I could see, I would love it. But I think the bigger question is that if I could see, it would make my life so much easier. It would just be easier to live, be easier to do things. It would really, really just make my life so much easier. So if I could see, I would be immensely happy. But I think the answer to the question is that even though I'd love to be able to see, I don't really spend much of my time thinking about it. Because I have too many other things to do, and the day is so full with so many other activities and events, and so many other things I got to get through, that I just simply don't have the time to even really think about having the chance to be able to see.
How do you actually, how do you bike ride if you can't see?
You use a tandem bike, so it's a tandem. So you ride with a guide.
Oh, I got it.
The guide is in the front, you're in the back, and you pedal together. But now it's 112 miles for the Ironman, so you have to be in tandem with your guide. And if you're not, you can get horribly hurt because you're going at really high speeds, and if you're not working as a team or you're not totally in cooperation or in concert, you're going to take a nasty, nasty fall.
Where do you live?
Well, I travel all over the world for work. So I live in New York, and I also live in Detroit, which is where our headquarters is. But my job is requiring me, as a trial lawyer, my job requires me to have to travel constantly in order to do my work.
You travel alone, or you have someone comes with you?
I travel, depends on where I'm going. If I'm going on a long trip, I'll bring staff, primarily just because I need to run my office, and they need to be there to help me run it. But if it's a shorter trip, I'll just do it independently.
Are you comfortable taking a trip on your own?
Yes. Yeah. And it's just a requirement. You have to be able to, in order for me to do my job, it's kind of a requirement that you have to be able to do it.
I know you mentioned the Ironman before,
Yes.
and went in on it, elaborate on it, but from what I learned about it, it's extremely intense kind of thing.
Yes.
Can you just speak a little bit more about how that was completing it? Like you said, it was like a kick in the face, like the swimming part of it and the challenge. Just, it's incredible. I think that anyone, I can enjoy it, a lot of people can't. The fact that you completed this is an amazing thing.
So the Ironman takes about 2 years of training. And it was about a 2-year training regimen that you had to be on. And it was, it was incredibly intense in terms of the level of training that went into it was massive in terms of what you had to do. It took me 14 hours and 36 minutes to do it. The critical component of doing the Ironman is that you're not allowed to rest. That's what makes it so hard, that you can't rest. See, if you rest, you only are given a certain period of time to do a swim. You're given a certain period of time to do the bike, and a certain period of time to do the run. They call them transition points, and you only have a certain limited period of time in order to do your transition. And it's very strict. If you miss one cutoff time, you're disqualified from the competition. You're just disqualified. And it's like you weren't even there. So that's the hardest part, was just the fact that the level of training was so massive. But on top of the training, it was the actual competition never ended. It just kept going. And you were in constant motion. And the pain was very intense because every part of your body hurts. But you have to kind of race through it because you've worked so hard that you don't want to give up. You don't want to stop because you've given so much to do this. So it's the hardest. The Ironman is labeled as the hardest physical competition in the world. It's harder than an ultra marathon because you're doing 3 consecutive activities. You're swimming, you're biking, and you're running. And there's only, if I'm not mistaken, there are only 5 blind people in the world who've done it.
Wow.
So it's myself and 4 others who were the only ones who ever completed it. And I will tell you, it was, of the experiences I've ever had, that was one of the hard, that includes passing the bar, becoming a lawyer. That was by far one of the most difficult, challenging experiences I think that I've ever come to know.
How do you incorporate Judaism into spirituality, Islam into your daily life and success and all that?
Well, I think that the way I incorporate it is that it's very easy to have a relationship with Hashem when life is good, when business is going well, when you're in good health, when things are going your way. It's easy to have a relationship. I think for me, it's one of those situations that a real relationship is defined by adversity, hardship, pain, struggle. And when you have that kind of a relationship, which is filled with pain and difficulty and struggle, that's when you really come to have a serious relationship. See, because you can do the prayers and all that good stuff, but at the end of the day, when you're out there in the lake and it's 55 degrees and you feel like you're drowning, which you literally are drowning because someone gets tangled in the rope, it does force you under the surface. That's, the time that you really come to know your Creator, because you really come to rely on Him to allow for you to survive and to allow for you to carry forward.
So you have a lot of faith.
You can't be a blind person and be an athlete, and be an attorney, and do these kinds of things without having faith, because for me, every day that I actually get through or walk the streets or do anything is a miracle. Tomorrow I have to fly to the Bahamas, which sounds great until you hear what it's for. It's not so. It's funny because it sounds better than it is, but I'm going to spend the weekend with parents of dying children. So these are children that are terminal, and these are children that are dying soon, not later, but within the year. And the idea is for the families and for the children to come together in a location where they can be as one and they can say goodbye for the most part.
From all over the world?
The children who are dying are the ones who are the most peaceful. They're the ones who accept it, and they're the ones who have found peace with it. It's the family members and the friends and those people that have the hardest time with it. So I think, at the end of the day, the thing that people with disabilities have that I think is a real blessing is that we live our life with perspective. We know what's important versus what is not, and we know what to prioritize versus what not to prioritize. But I think it comes to people that have a severe disability to know what to focus on versus what not to focus on. Other questions?
How do you sum up your audience and decide the best method of speech to use to communicate your points to them?
Well, you first want to do your research. You want to know who they are, what their story is. The most important thing is understanding the story of the people that you're connecting with, and recognizing that every single person you meet and encounter has a story. And it's their story that makes them who they are. It's people's life experiences that make them the people they are. And the most important thing is you got to respect the life experience, and you have to respect the story that people have.
How do you read that in a short time, say in a place like this or in a courtroom?
You would do it by history and background. You also do it by getting a gauge on what's going on with people when you're speaking. So you can tell, like I can tell that here you have kind of two sets of people. You have, I would say, I can't count, I don't know. You have a certain number of people that are really focused, because you can tell when people are focused because they're quiet and they're very intense and you can feel it.
Tonight most of them are focused.
Right, so you have a certain
You
percentage.
have a good audience.
Right, so you have a certain percentage that are, and you can tell because there's no movement, there's no shuffling. So for that, you kind of keep going, you keep doing your thing. But then you can also tell, like if you're talking to a jury or a judge or what have you, if people start shuffling, if they start doing other things, you can pick up on that and you can tell, so who's doing what and what's going on. And then that tends to impact how you speak. So, here it's an interesting balancing act because you have some people that are actually really interested and focused, and that's why I keep going, is because I'm trying to reconnect with that. And you have other people who aren't. So the question is, how do you balance between the ones that are and the ones that aren't? So what you can gauge here is that you have certain people that are really kind of intense and very into it, So then I keep going, and you do it for those people because you're trying to connect with those people. I teach at the University of Michigan, and one of the things that you learn when you're a professor is that, look, you can't reach everyone. You try to reach the people that are interested, and at the end of the day, those are the reasons why you do it. So other questions?
I have a question. What do you think of audiobooks?
So audiobooks are great. Audiobooks are, I think audiobooks can be, very, very effective. But I think now what happens is that technology has made it much more effective because you can just hear it on, it's all technology now. And you can have it downloaded off the computer, and you can listen off the computer, and it makes it much more effective and much easier to do things because of the technological component. Other questions?
Do you have a full-time someone can care in the house, helping you out? Or?
No, I live alone.
Do you know of anybody who has ever born?
In the community, every single person has a uniqueness to themselves. And you have to always respect and admire that and recognize that exists within everyone that you interact with. The second part of your question was, I think, if you could repeat it again for me, I think it was overcoming, if I'm not mistaken.
It appears to me that you haven't been confined by your disability. Do you think that that's the case? Is that true? It seems like you rose above it. It wasn't such, not that you chose to be in this situation, God forbid, but it seems to me that you've risen above it in several different factors that other people may have not. So do you still feel, how do you feel like, I would use the term, not like a prisoner to it.
Right.
How do you relate to your disability? More, not just now when you're in front of people, but maybe even, how does that work to you? Do you feel you rose above it, and do you still feel confined by it?
So, I actually feel that I'm a very, very lucky person. The reason that I feel that I'm an incredibly lucky person is for two reasons. Number one, I think it's a blessing to have a little bit of struggle, because people who have struggle become a little nicer. They're a little kinder. They're a little warmer. They have a sense of empathy and understanding. They're able to be a little bit more patient, and they're able to really connect with other people, I think, in a more profound way. So I think for me personally, that I think correlates to like a real blessing. The second thing, though, is that I'm incredibly fortunate because so much of it's resource-driven. I've been blessed that I was born into a family that we have the resources to be able to do the kind of work that we're able to do. So I think often is the case, you get one or the other. You get adversity, hardship, or challenge without the resources to be able to make change. Or you get number two, which is you have people that have everything and wind up having nothing. You get people who have tremendous access and wealth and privilege. But at the same time, they don't know hardship, they don't know adversity, they don't know difficulty. So as a result, they just have they can't connect because they just simply haven't really experienced any component of life that's difficult. So they have no real way to empathize, relate, or begin to connect with other people. I think for me, the reason that, I feel very blessed is because I'm able to do both. To know hardship and challenge, but at the same time, have the opportunity to do something about it. And I think that, for me, is a great blessing. Is the ability to be a lawyer where you can feel injustice or know injustice, but at the same time, have the opportunity to remedy it. Other questions?
I have a question. Are you naturally such a positive person, or is it something that you've worked on?
It's a great question. I don't think that anyone is naturally positive. I think it's a choice, and I think it's something you work on each and every day. Because I don't think it's genetic. I don't think it's inherent. I think it's something that, and I don't think you start that way and end that way. I think that, some people start off being positive and become negative. Some people become negative and become positive. I think it's a continual choice And I think it's something that you continually have to work at each and every day. Other questions?
Have you ever wanted to get married?
Yes. And hopefully that will happen one day.
Okay.
I would love it if that were to happen. Now, like,
We'll all be by the wedding.
absolutely. Now, being blind, it's more challenging. It's you got to, it's as if
If you can do a marathon, you should be able to get married too.
it's very challenging. You have to find people that are going to be accepting of it and that are going to connect with you, and you have to find people that are willing to. Not everyone.
I bet you there's a huge list of ladies that would love to marry him.
Not what you think. It's very tough. You'd be surprised. It's very.
It's for the wrong reasons. You don't want people chasing after you.
But the challenge is that when you're blind, you're different, and because you're different, a lot of people just are anxious about it and don't want to do it. Because it's just you don't fit the mold. So because you don't fit the mold, you're not like everybody else. It's easier to pass you up and go on to the next person. Other questions?
I have one.
Yes.
Oh. You don't mind me asking. Do you mind that I ask these questions?
No, it's fine.
I'll mind for him.
Okay.
They're good questions.
Okay, I'm just very curious. I have my, I'll say, before I say it, it's amazing the way how you articulated an answer to my question, which was the relation to your disability to someone else's. Because I have my own disability, and I think you hit the nail right on the damn head. So thank you. I got a lot of inspiration. So thank you so much. But I have a question for you.
Yes.
Hope this doesn't come out wrong. I'm very sensitive.
No,
I'm
you're
just
doing great.
curious.
Actually, these are great questions.
What are the few worst things that you hate about your disability? I know you have to come to the times where you say that, hell, this is so terrible.
So
what are those?
It's the biggest challenge that someone in my situation is going to face, or for other people in other situations are going to face, is lowered expectations. I think that's the biggest challenge. I think people tend to have a certain lower expectation of someone who's different. I think when I was in high school, that was the most difficult time that I ever went through because, I wasn't part of the cool crowd. I didn't fit in. I had to struggle a lot more. It was incredibly challenging. And I think there was a social structure that existed that was very tough to break through, especially when you're in high school. And what I learned from it was that I wish someone had told me this when I was going through it, which was things only get better. Life gets better the more experience you have. So when I was in high school, I never imagined I'd be a lawyer. I never imagined I'd be a university professor. I never imagined I'd be a radio host. I never imagined I'd do all these marathons and triathlons. I never imagined I would travel throughout the world doing my work. I never imagined those things. Because I used to think when I was in high school that's all there was. I didn't really venture beyond the confines of my town. And I didn't realize that there was anything really beyond that. So really what would happen is, however I was in high school, was how I thought I was going to be, pretty much forever. So the idea being because you don't know any different. So I wish someone had told me this, that it really does get better. And that when you're younger and you're going through those situations, you just don't have any idea what's out there. You don't have any idea what awaits you. And you don't really have any idea what opportunities there actually are in the world until you experience them firsthand. So when I was in high school, I didn't know that any of these things existed. And I really wish that someone had simply told me how much better things were going to get the older that I got and the more experience that I was going to have. Other questions?
I got one more.
Okay.
Can I ask one?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
When you speak in public, are you any less anxious, less nervous because you can see the people you're relating to?
No,
or
because you know who's there and where they are. Just because you can't see them, you still know who's around and you know what's going on because you still can tell what's happening. You can sense it. You know the people. You can feel the presence of the people. So you have an understanding and an appreciation of what's happening.
So you're more nervous or?
Same. It would be identical to someone who had sight and could see the people.
One more crazy question. Can you sense a smile?
Yes. Not necessarily from the smile.
Here's the
Well, not necessarily if it's a physical smile, but you can sense the energy of the person and...
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Yes, you could sense if this is a warm or kind person. You could sense, what the person's actually like.
You could sense in a full room though, like let's say here, you could tell who's pretty much facial expressions or what, or like what sort of body figure
you
they're
could
at.
tell. You can tell what their energy is like, but more not necessarily here because you'd have to talk to people one-on-one to do it.
What energy did you feel here tonight?
Well, I think that there was a real incredible level of interest, and I think that people were very focused and attentive, and you can tell that with your questions that there was a connection, and if there's a connection, that makes me feel very proud. Because if there's a connection, then it makes it worth it. Other questions?
Yes, could I ask my question?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
First one.
Yeah, I wanted to give a little bit of a preliminary. I'm here with Moshe Feiglin. Moshe Feiglin's been very nice to me, and I would say in the past year, I went through a lot of self-discovery and self-improvement. I'm an attorney as well.
Right.
And I had my mild life challenges that I've had, and I've risen above a lot of them, and I still struggle with others. I constantly seek inspiration. I went to Landmark Forum, I don't know if you've heard of that. I've attended self-help seminars, and I seek wisdom. I'm sure you've done the same. What has spoken to you? What's helped you? What would you tell me to reference in my quest towards becoming a better person, to maybe running triathlons, to maybe becoming a better attorney, becoming a better friend, becoming a better parent? What would you suggest? I know it's going to be amazing.
You just do it one day at a time.
Now, do you have any like books that you
No,
recommend?
no, there's nothing. You just do it one day at a time. It's like doing a marathon or an Ironman or a triathlon. You do it one day. When I went to the park for the first time to run, I had never done anything athletic in my life. And we did 1 mile. The next day we did 2. Then we did 5. Then we did 10. It's literally just a one day at a time proposition.
How do you run in the park?
You have a guide and they give you directional cues. Hard right, soft right, hard left, soft left.
So you have to run with somebody.
You run with someone and they give you directions.
It doesn't have to be attached with you to a string.
Yes, you use a rope.
Oh.
And you hold one side, they hold the other side. And you can feel their body motion it.
No, because you mentioned that right at the beginning about
With the bike.
I'm sorry?
You mentioned that about running. You did mention about a rope right at
Right,
the beginning.
right. You have to feel the rope,
How
and it connects you to them, so that way you can feel the tug. And I think that's a helpful thing.
What time do you wake up every morning?
I'm up at 4.
4 o'clock?
I don't sleep because of my injury, because I'm in pain a lot, so I don't really get a full night's sleep because I'm just so uncomfortable. Well, guys, listen, I want to thank you for this incredible opportunity to come and visit with you guys. This was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I hope we can do another. I'll tell you what, if the rabbis are interested, we can maybe do another one of these in the future and have some more questions and some more discussions. And I really, really appreciate this. I have to confess, I'm exhausted. I've been up since 5. And I've had a lot to do today. It's been a hard day for me.
Sure.
And I have an early flight tomorrow to
Thanks so much for coming.
deal with.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Maybe we should do a little dance with him before we go.
No, it's okay.
I'm Israel. Hi, I'm Israel. Hi, I'm Israel. I'm Israel. I'm Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Good luck. I work during the day for Yod Oldsburg.
See you all the time.
I look forward to seeing more of your successes.
I'm Israel. Hi.
Stores do it. They give you a good personal shot for that. That's very helpful. Y'all, thank you very much. And like I said, hopefully I'll be invited to come back and we'll do something.
Thank you very much.
Of course, it was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having us a moment. Okay, Simon? I'm actually picking Richard.
Yeah, and then
I wasn't doing it for any other reason. I was curious, right? You saw that. I was curious about that shit, bro. I have my disabilities too.
Good.
Yeah, I can direct you. Once you get to the city, you know what I mean?
You want to tag along for a ride, or you want to chill here? That's it,
That's like
You see where my question is, George? Isn't that amazing, like the comparison there? Ugh.
This guy's not.
That's I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't even believe it. This has got to be one of the most powerful stories I've ever seen.
I show this every week.
Thank you, just missed the same word. Another 30. There's a way more interesting way.
Wow.
Your spiritual connection, because they're not distracted by the world. Because most distractions come in a physical sense. Most distractions come from a visual sense. But a blind person just doesn't have those distractions because, you can't see it. So as a result, the physical world is a world that we just can't even appreciate or understand. So as a result, we live in a more spiritual type world.
So your hearing is like 10 times better than somebody else's.
So the issue is that your hearing isn't better. What happens is that you use it more. So because you use your hearing more, it's much more refined. Your hearing becomes refined. So your hearing and my hearing are exactly the same. The only difference is I use my hearing more. So as a result, because I use it more, I rely on it more, it's a much more refined sense.
You don't have like better senses?
No, you don't have. My hearing and your hearing are identical. There's no difference.
He knows you from before?
The only difference is that because I use it more, I rely on it more. So it's not that it's better. It's just physically it's the exact same. It's just it's identical, but it's just because it's more refined.
But being that you grew up blind, are you kind of like used to it, or you still feel like
You don't know
you're
any.
held back?
You just don't know any different. So you just don't know. You don't know any different. You don't have any idea. If you don't know any differently, it's a whole. The world is just a very different place because you just don't know any different.
You ever hear the movie Ascent of a Woman?
Yes, I've seen it. It's a wonderful movie.
How did you see it?
Well,
You
when you say see, well, it's interesting because we don't get caught up in the political correctness. So I don't want people to ever be uncomfortable around someone who's disabled. So we use the same words that you all use.
Sorry, man. I don't mean.
So you listen
No,
to
no,
movies?
it's no problem. No, what I was saying, what I'm saying is that I often say, oh, I see this or I see that, and I think it's important so that you don't ever make people feel awkward or uncomfortable around being around you.
So what did you think about that movie, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, so just to give the other folks a little bit of background on it, Scent of a Woman was about a blind gentleman who was a retired colonel. And there was a gentleman by the name of Charlie who was a student at a prep school. And they went to New York for a weekend together. And it was just the idea of how they bonded and what they went through and how they connected and all those kinds of things. And it was actually a wonderful movie. I mean, it was a wonderful, wonderful movie. I happen to really like it. I've always wanted to drive a car. I've never been able to do that. But that's the one thing I've always dreamed of doing, is having the opportunity to drive. Because for me, that would be really a dream come true to do that. I've never had that chance yet. And he did it in the movie. They were driving a Ferrari, and it was, I thought that was just a really, really cool thing.
How did you see it?
I'm sorry?
How did you see the movie?
So I just listened. I mean, but what happens is...
You created the image in your head?
No, because you don't really... Blind people, we don't understand the
There's no
imaging.
images. I don't even know what an image is.
So what you do is we tend to go to movies that have good plots, good writing, good dialogue. I don't like to see movies that are more action-oriented because then you can't follow what's going on.
Can't hear what they're saying.
Well, even if you can hear what they're saying, it's usually not a plot-driven movie. It's usually not. It's not usually good dialogue. It's not sophisticated dialogue. So,
what was the most beautiful scene you ever created in your mind?
well, it would just all be, it would all be very, it's all hearing based. So it's all listening. But it would be the same as you for the most part, it's just absent the vision.
I want to ask you a question. You're sitting here, a group of 20 young men.
Uh-huh.
There's older guys, there's a bunch of younger guys, age 18 to 22, 23. What lesson could you tell them about their lives? That they should be happier, that they should want to be more successful. Tell them something what they could learn out from you, from other things in their life where to make them a better person.
So my mentor, the gentleman by the name of, I do a TV show in Detroit on people who make a difference in our community. And we also do a radio program for NBC Radio on people that make a difference and impact the community. I met a gentleman who became one of my closest friends, and his name was Tony Philippus. So Tony Philippus basically has since passed on. But Tony Philippus had a dream of becoming a world-class championship athlete. And he was going to be a boxer. That was what he was going to be. So this was back in the 1930s in Detroit. I got to know Tony later in his years. But he was going to be a championship boxer. It was the Depression. It was Detroit, Michigan. Him and his friends wanted to go to a local swimming hole. They wanted to do some swimming. It was a really hot day. So they wanted to go and have a chance to cool off. And they were at a railroad yard. And they were going to hop a train and take the train to the watering hole. And as the train passed by, Tony's friends all leaped for the train and were successful in making it. Tony jumped for the train and missed, fell under the train, and the cars of the train ran over him. So this was back in the days where they didn't have the kind of advancements we have today. And he lost both, miraculously he survived. And he lost both of his legs, from here down and from here down. They didn't have prosthetics the way we do today, and they gave him pieces of wood. That was going to be his legs. So he thought, for the most part, his whole life was ruined. Understandably so. He would go to work, he would try to get a job at General Motors or Ford or Chrysler. Go there, and they'd say, you know what? You know, you're a freak and a weirdo, and we don't want you here. You know, you depress our vendors, you depress our clientele. You know, we would never give you a job here because you're hard to look at. So he thought his life was finished. He thought his life was done. He didn't, you know, have any idea what he was going to do because he thought that he was going to be one thing. He thought that he was going to be an engineer. Excuse me, he was going to be an athlete. He was going to be a boxer. That's what he thought he was going to be. So when that ended, he thought his life ended with it because he thought that was it. But he came to realize that he had a tremendous engineering mind. He never thought for a second that he was an engineer. But he came to realize that he had a remarkable engineering mind. And what happened beyond that was he became the father of modern day prosthetics. Wow. So what happened was, and he was also like my best friend. He lived in Detroit, Rochester, Michigan, founded his own company. When he died at 91, his company employed over 1,000 people.
Wow.
But more importantly, he impacted hundreds of thousands of people. You know, all the devices that we see in our houses, like the lifts that go up and down the stairs so seniors can live at home, or the types of vans that go where you can, the lift that goes up and down in the van, or the types of prosthetic devices you see people wearing, those all came from him. He was the father. He was the guy that helped design that and create that. So the idea was that you sometimes don't know what direction your life is going. Had he not had the accident, his life would have been much easier. It would not have involved the pain and the struggle that it did. But I don't think it would have had the meaning. I don't think it would have had the impact. I don't think it would have had the effect on the world that this one individual ultimately had. Hundreds and thousands of people live independently, walk, run, do things that they never thought they could do. Me personally, he's the reason I got involved in athletics. Because he told me, he said, athletics is so important that even though he didn't get to become a championship fighter, he wanted for me to have the opportunity to experience athletics, and now I've done 18 marathons and Ironman because of him. So I guess my point is that you just never know why things happen the way they do, but if you're able to kind of absorb it and adapt to it, you start to realize that things happen in an extraordinary way. Other questions?
You probably need a lot of trust in people, like running your business and taking care of your accounts and money and stuff like that.
You have to have tremendous trust in people because you can't do anything without people. Everything from crossing the street to counting money to doing the most basic stuff, you have to heavily rely on people to do that. But blind people have a tremendous connection with people because we have to.
Have you ever been ripped off by people?
No. Not one time. And you have to completely rely. Like, you literally, if you're giving someone money and they give you change, you have to completely trust that they're giving you the appropriate change. And, I've never had an issue with it.
You run a big law firm now?
I'm sorry?
You run a law firm?
I run our public services division in my family's law firm. And what we do is we represent disabled people, and we take on the airline industry, universities, public transport, municipalities. We're fighting with the mayor over Central Park to rebuild it, to make it accessible. So we do the kind of
wheelchair accessible?
All types of accessibility for blind, wheelchair, everything. But the goal is that, we fight with the U.S. airlines. Airlines didn't always let disabled people fly. That was a case I spent 5 years on in federal court to earn the right for disabled people to fly.
Don't let disabled people fly?
Before my case, it was very difficult for disabled people to travel. Now things are really changing to make it better, and the court ruled in a way that basically requires airlines to operate differently than they had in the past, which is going to allow for greater access for the disabled. In terms of transport, training, how airports are built, modified, adapted to allow for greater access. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
I've always considered blindness, and not only me, this is obvious, to be a very, tough human condition. It's a very hard, obviously, one of the worst human conditions that someone could be in, potentially, without. I've read this, that's kind of what I've been taught and how I've come to believe. So my question to you is, what do you say to people that have mild disabilities compared to something like more severe to blindness? How would you compare the two? And how, that's number one, that's my first part of my question. How would you compare like a more mild, someone dealing with a mild disability, and maybe they feel a little handicapped? How would someone in that situation and your situation relate to one another? And I have a second part of my question is, obviously it seems like you really rose above your disability. And, by that I mean you've run marathons and you've become a successful attorney. That's what the image that I'm seeing is someone that clearly said, hell with this, I'm going to enjoy my time that I have. So my question is, do you feel like you've done that? And how does blindness affect you? So the first part is, how does a disability as severe as blindness relate to more mild disabilities? And did you rise above your disability? And how does it affect your life?
Sure, those are wonderful questions. I think number one, everyone's got their own struggle. And everyone's struggle is significant. So whether it's blindness, autism, Down syndrome, attention deficit, whatever it is, everyone has their own story, everyone has their own struggles, and everyone has their own challenges. And I think what's critical is you have to respect everyone's individual challenge, everyone's individual difficulty. No one has a bigger challenge or a harder challenge than someone else.